It's probably not one of the fondest memories that I have. There were some good things about it, but I just remember going there, and I was the only girl in my group, and there were a bunch of elders, and feeling kind of uncomfortable because I hadn't met any sisters yet, and all the elders were really like stiff around me, and I was like, what do I do? And I was tired. And then they had us go out and contact people the very first thing when we got there. And so I tried to talk to some people, and they kind of laughed at me, and I didn't have like a companion who was better than I was to rely on or anything. And it ended up with someone, I tried to make one last contact with someone, and a guy said something kind of inappropriate that I only vaguely understood, and I just started crying, and all the elders were really weird around me, and I felt uncomfortable, and I was like, this is so humiliating. But then we went to a restaurant, and we had really good Czech food, and I got to sleep for a really long time, and it was all okay after that, and the rest of the mission was a dream. But it wasn't the best first day. I served in the Czech Prague Mission, and that includes the Czech Republic and also Slovakia, but while I was there they didn't have any sisters in Slovakia. And that's two different languages. So there's, in the Czech Republic you speak Czech, and in Slovakia you speak Slovak. And so you'd meet a lot of Slovakians in the Czech Republic, and probably some Czechs in Slovakia, but you mainly spoke those languages. There are some really cool things about it. Sugar cubes were invented there. Contact lenses were invented there. They used to be under communism for sure, and so there are some things about that they still kind of resent in some ways, and yet at the same time there's still like some of the traditions of communism, like being against religion and stuff like that, are still part of their general sentiment. I think they can't necessarily see that some of it is still affecting them in those ways, but they're also probably the most westernized of the Eastern countries, if that makes sense. They're one of the only countries that was under communism that has now become more successful economically since communism fell than they were before. Most of the other countries were much more powerful before and aren't doing as well now. And tourism has a lot to do with that. They're also really well known for their beer. So a lot of other people around Europe know that about them. And they love fairy tales. That is something that's really cool. It's kind of, Prague is like a little fairy tale city, but they love their fairy tales. They have like their own collection of Czech fairy tales. And everybody, they play them on TV, especially on Christmas Day, and everybody, even adults, sits down with their family and watches them. There's even a city that's known as like the City of Fairy Tales. And so that's something that's really cool, a cool part of their heritage too. In a lot of ways, other than like cobblestone roads and those types of things, there are a lot of things that are similar. You'll see big shopping malls in the big areas, and you'll see like schools that look nice, big universities and stuff like that. There are some things that are different. They're more like little shops set up on the side of the street. That's different. A lot more bars in places than you'll see, especially than in Utah, but than in like a suburban area in general. And grocery stores are different because you have to bag all your stuff. Nobody bags them for you. And customer service is a little different because it's more like you as the customer need to respect me as the owner of the shop instead of I'll do whatever to make the customer happy. But it's a cool place. I don't know. There are lots of things that you notice that are different. It's interesting because before I left, I found out that it was the most atheist country in the world. Like 80% atheists according to census. But when you get there, like you find out that there aren't very many true atheists there. It's more of a tradition in the sense that maybe in South America, Catholicism is a tradition or things like that. You'll talk to them and they'll say, oh, I'm atheist. Like I'm not the person you're looking for. And then you talk to them a little more and they'll say, well, I believe that something exists. And then you talk to them a little more and they'll be like, well, I did pray once. You're kind of like, well, who did you pray to? But it was a big testimony builder to me that everyone can feel that there is something there. But there's a lot of skepticism about religions and churches in general just because of communism and things they were taught about churches and communism, and also the way some churches have acted since communism just makes them wary of an organized structure like that maybe they might feel like they have to follow the organization instead of how they really feel, or it might contradict how they feel and they won't be able to get out of it. And so a lot of them feel an inner conflict in that way when it comes to churches and religions in general. So a lot of them, when you talk to them, they are looking for something, but they don't think that a church or religion is what's going to bring them the thing they're looking for. And so a lot of the stuff as a missionary that makes a difference is you being really honest and showing them the joy that the gospel really does bring. And they see the joy and they're like, that's what I'm looking for. How do I get that? So it's really neat. The people there are really cool, but it can be intimidating in the beginning, the responses you get. The church in the Czech Republic is really dependent on missionaries in a lot of ways. In some branches, the branch president is a missionary, but it's really important for them to learn to do it on their own as well, and also to be involved in their own missionary work. A lot of them are struggling with being open about their beliefs, or I think maybe it's just the same as it is everywhere, but saying, oh, everybody knows that we're members and they know that we don't drink, so they don't want to talk to us about it. But if they could see how effective and amazing member missionary work is, I think that's when it would really take off. And maybe, I guess that's true everywhere. But most of them were found by missionaries, and because of that, they love missionaries and they think the world of them. And so if you're an example to them as a missionary, or if you won't give up and asking them to help and come teach with you, they respect it and they'll do it. So most people think of it as kind of this fairy tale land. It's one of the biggest tourist spots in Europe, and Prague in and of itself really is. It's so beautiful, and like roads are made out of cobblestone, and just everything is so pretty when you're in the city. But that's kind of all most people think of when they're there. And there are trams that everybody rides out in the city, so you either ride that or a bus. And so those are pretty much everywhere. And sometimes it feels like the tram drivers, if they see that you're running for the tram, like you're about to be late, some of them are nice and wait for you, but some of them I think get a little bit of enjoyment out of being like, oh, maybe next time, and going away. So in Prague, it's really beautiful because it's like cobblestone. They have the Prague Castle, which is famous there, and it's the thing that is really neat about Prague is that they have architecture and art there from all different eras. So the big deal about it is that during like World War II, it was never destroyed because Hitler wanted to make it his capital because it was such a beautiful city. So it never got destroyed like a lot of other Eastern European countries. And so it has lots of different styles of architecture there in the main part of the city. In the rest of it, there definitely are kind of ugly apartment buildings. They're just made out of cement, but they try and make them nicer by painting them fun colors. So that's kind of cool. You get all 4 seasons. The first winter I was there, it got really cold because I was in the northern part of the country. And sometimes, like, we wore coats that looked like sleeping bags because that's, you gotta be comfortable, you know. And it snowed a bit. The second winter, it got cold, but snowed maybe once while I was there, and then the snow didn't really stick. But the summers, I think it's kind of like Utah in a lot of ways. Like the summers are hot, but it's not particularly humid or anything. So it's good weather. It's really beautiful in the fall too, because there are lots of trees there and everything looks really pretty. I would say that European people in general, but Czech people too, kind of have closed down for their own environment. It's different there because you're outside a lot still when the weather is cold. Like most people don't have cars, they use public transportation. And so they have things that are more for weather, like when it's cold or when it's rainy, that are more functional, and it doesn't look like you're going camping, which you don't want to look like that as a missionary. So on a lot of things, I would wait until you get there to get them, like especially winter stuff. Yeah, it's just better that way. And they tend to have like more comfortable shoes there too, just because they do a lot of walking over there and they walk on cobblestone, stuff like that. So you might end up paying a little bit more for some things, but the quality will be better and the comfort will be better and it will look nicer. So I know a lot of people who brought stuff and then just ended up buying things there anyways. That's what I would suggest. I mean, the biggest thing with anyone on a mission is following the Spirit. When you do, you'll be safe. There are always going to be people that you shouldn't talk to. And there could be people that look like people you shouldn't talk to that really need the gospel. So it's really hard to have like a hard and fast rule. Do this or don't do this, or avoid these people or don't avoid these people. But I think basically if you follow the mission rules, you should be okay. If you act smart. There was an incident where there's a guy that we had contacted. The elders started teaching him, but he kept coming to the church, and I don't think it was all right mentally. But he kept coming to the church asking for me, and at first our mission president was like, I don't think it's that big of a deal. But then he left a note on the mission president's car once when the mission president was there, and so he transferred us. Like the next day we had to leave, and elders came in to where we were, and we went up to a place where elders were. And so that was kind of crazy. It was my second transfer to the beginning of it, so I didn't expect it. But things like that are also inspired because we had an amazing several transfers up in the place we were transferred to, and they hadn't had sisters before. So I don't know, just be smart, follow the Spirit, follow the rules. Like around Christmas, they don't have a Santa Claus. Well, they do. So a few days before Christmas, they have like a Santa Claus and a devil, and they go around and they like tell you if you've been good or bad, and they give you candy if you've been good, and the devil's supposed to put little kids in his bag if he hasn't been good and stuff like that. They call him Nikolash, that's like Nicholas. But that's a few days before. Then on Christmas Eve, that's the big day for them, Christmas Eve, and it kind of lasts for 3 days. So you have Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, and then the next day. The tradition is that baby Jesus comes and brings you your presents, and he leaves them by the window. And they eat carp, like fish, and potato salad for Christmas, which I was always like, that's a summer food, why do we eat that at Christmas? But it does, and carp has a lot of little tiny bones in it, so they say that there are stories of people choking on them every year, but people still eat carp. And so that was really cool. And they actually, so I left to come home like 2 days after Christmas, and it was really neat because we went over to a member's house and they showed us some traditions, and then afterwards we went to the middle of the town and they had this big like music performance that they put on, because a lot of Czech people really like music, and they just sang all these kind of opera style songs about Christmas. It was really neat. I think probably the weirdest tradition is an Easter. So a lot of these traditions, a lot of people there don't really understand why they do them, because they're not as religious. So they're just like, it's tradition, that's why we do them. And for Easter, they build really long whips. They're not real whips like we think of out of leather and they move a lot. It's just like branches that they weave together, and they put colored ribbon at the end. And the men go around and whip the women, and the women give them alcohol or chocolate in exchange for it. And so they'll go from house to house and whip the women, and then they get either drunker and drunker or more candy as they go. And it's a really bizarre tradition, but one of the women explained it, how it had roots in like a pagan celebration of spring, and how it was supposed to represent fertility or something like that. Usually it's all in good fun, like people don't get really hurt, but I had a really hard time understanding that when I first got there. And I even, when Easter got close, I'd ask, when we're contacting people, I'd be like, well, what does Easter mean to you? And once I talked to a guy who had just come back from Ireland, but he was Czech, and he was like, you know, I used to think that was normal, and then I left, and I realized that that's a really weird tradition, and anyone else would look at that as being a really bad thing. I was like, yeah, it's probably true, but it's so funny, even like in the church, the old ladies in our branches would be like, elders, you have to come over and whip us. We'll be so mad if you don't. So it's different, but it ended up being fun. There are a lot of interesting traditions. One that made things kind of difficult as a missionary is that a lot of people, so they live in tiny apartments in the city, and then on weekends they go to a cottage that they have out in the open area, and they'll have like a garden there. And so sometimes that made it difficult, because when you wanted people to come to church, they'd be like, I can't, I'm going to my cottage for the weekend. And so that was something, a tradition that you had to help them see this is more important. They'll melt lead, and then they stick it in cold water, and the shape that it forms is supposed to predict what your year is going to be like. And they also cut an apple in half, and if the seeds are in a pattern of a star, then you're going to have good luck for the year. But if they're in the pattern of an X, then someone's going to die that year. But when you look at the bottom of the apple, you can kind of tell if it's going to be a star or an X, so people mostly just cheat on it. And they have ones where girls will throw their shoes, they'll have their backs facing the door, and they'll throw their shoe over their head, and if it's pointing towards the door, that means you're going to get married that year, and if it's not, then it's going to be a long time before you get married. So their food tends to be kind of heavier. It's good, but personally it's not stuff that I would want to eat all the time because it is heavy. So most of their dishes, like one really famous dish is called svíčková. And if you ever serve in Ostrava and you meet Sister Renata, she makes the best svíčková in the Czech Republic. So you'd be really lucky to go there. But they'll usually have these things called knedlíky. They're like little dumplings. They almost look like a spongy bread. And then they'll have a thing of meat and then just some sort of sauce that they pour all over it. And that's what a lot of them look like. A few of them will have like sauerkraut on top of that. And it's good. They have other things that are the knedlíky, but it's more of a dessert where it's fruit stuffed inside of it. And they'll put either butter and powdered sugar on top of it or a kind of sauce on top of it. Those are really good too. They also have these really good things. It's like the substitute for French fries there. They have things called croquetti. It's made out of potatoes, but they're in little balls and they deep fry them. And so it's like soft in the inside but crispy on the outside. It's really good. So they have lots of good things there. And most missionaries really like the soda kofula that they have there. It's not very sweet. It's almost like a cola, but just not as sweet. I don't like it that much, but a lot of people really like that. So they have lots of stuff like that. It's funny because they, like, Czech food just feels very Czech once you get used to it. And so sometimes we'd go to like Mexican restaurants or Italian restaurants and it was like Mexican food but very Czech still. Like I ordered a burrito and it was like a tortilla with kind of like mashed potatoes inside and then meat on the side and then the sauce poured all over it. And it was just so funny because it's not our impression of Mexican food at all, but that's just how they do it. People there say it's like the 4th hardest language to learn, but I think everybody likes to think their language is pretty hard because they're kind of proud of it. And so the people are really understanding and really impressed when someone, especially someone who's native English speaker, learns Czech. But there's a letter in it. It's an R, and then it has a little, it's called a háček over it. It's like a little arrow over it. And it sounds like ž. So it's like rolling your R, but then a ž at the same time. So it gets really hard. I remember in the MTC getting a little discouraged and I'd try it over and over and over again, and then I'd get it one time and be like, oh, the gift of tongues, and then I couldn't do it again, so I'd have to keep practicing it. So that's a little bit difficult. And then of course as in with a lot of languages, you have to conjugate verbs based on who's saying it or who's doing it, and then you also have to decline words based on whether they're the ones acting or being acted upon or to or things like that. So it can be hard, but it's so fun. It's such a cool language. They have more verbs than English, that's for sure. So like they have a verb for calling someone but the other person doesn't pick it up, you just call it so they have your number. And it's prozvolný. And ever since I've been back, I've been like, oh, I wish we had a word for that. We don't. So it's a really good language. Prague is a really international city, so we taught in so many different languages because there are people from all over there, and sometimes all we could do was give them the Book of Mormon in their language and show them the Joseph Smith video in their language and give them pamphlets, and that was the extent of it. And we had one boy who was from China and his family was there. They owned a Chinese restaurant, and he came to English one day. His name was Li Hong, and he's kind of a shy kid, and I think he was 18 when we first met him, and he almost didn't go into English, but then a senior couple came in and opened the door for him, and they're like, come on in. So he came in, and his Czech wasn't very good at all, his English wasn't very good at all, but we started talking to him. We taught him English, and then afterwards we started talking to him a little bit, and so we got out Chinese pamphlets and we'd like give them to him, and we started meeting with him a little more after English lessons, and we'd go on to the library and type out something into Google Translate and then print it off and be like, here, do you understand this? And he'd be like, yeah, but we were never quite sure if he did. And so that was for maybe a transfer and a half. I was there for quite a while, and then I got a new companion who had actually studied Chinese for a few years in college, and so she was able to understand a little bit more, and we found out that he'd been reading the Book of Mormon, and we were like, whoa, this, like, he is interested in it. And word got around to our mission president about that, and he was like, well, this isn't going to cut it, because her Chinese wasn't that good anymore after learning Czech. And so he called up his friend who was a mission president in England, because that's where our mission president was from, and there he had a lot of missionaries who spoke Mandarin Chinese. And so we started teaching him with these other missionaries serving in England through Skype. And so we would like bring him to activities, make sure he had friends and stuff like that, and then we'd meet with him on Skype, and they'd teach him, and we'd share little things, and it was so cool. And actually he ended up getting baptized, and one of the missionaries who taught him on Skype he was just finishing his mission, so on his way home he stopped by Prague, and he was able to baptize him, which meant he could translate the whole thing into Chinese for him, and he could do his confirmation in Chinese, which was really significant to him. And it was so neat. He was so on fire, and he was like, when I'm older, I'm gonna have church in my house in China with people, and he was so on fire to be a missionary. And it was just so neat to think that the Lord took a boy from China and sister missionaries from the United States and had him meet in Prague, of all places, so that he could learn the gospel. And it was such a neat experience. We were all obsessed with him. It was so cool. Every day you'd see things like that. Lots of little ones. And I think one of the biggest lessons I learned was that there are a lot of little miracles that happen, and we as people with our agency don't have to take advantage of those. And so we saw a lot of miracles that was like the Lord showing individuals that He wanted to be a part of their lives, and they didn't have to accept Him, and maybe we'd never hear from Him again. We'd started doing like a family home evening for single adults, because there were a lot in the branch we were in. And so I sent out just like a mass text as a reminder to people, come and see. And there was one man in my phone that I had two names for, and it had just the transfer before been an elder's phone, so I didn't know how all the phone numbers got in there. But I sent the text to both numbers just because. And a little while later I got a phone call from a woman saying, did you send me the text about like the family night at your church? And I was like, yeah, but I think I meant to send it to someone else. Who is this? And she was like, she told me her name, and she was like, well, I can't come today, but I'd love to come another time. And she's like, do you guys sing at your church? And I was like, yeah, we sing a lot. And she's like, well, I'm looking for a church to go to. And I was like, we can help you. So we just set up a meeting with her to show her the building, and we had a member to introduce her to and stuff. And it was really neat. She had told us about how she'd had an experience when she was young where she just knew Jesus Christ was the Savior. and she was Catholic, because a lot of the people who are religious there tend to be Catholic. And she was about to be baptized, but the priest there told her that she didn't kneel correctly, and told her that she had too many questions. And she was like, "Are you kidding me?" And he told her that he wouldn't baptize her because of it. And she was like, "That does not seem right." So she was looking for a new church, and it just so happened that my text led to her number. And so we met with her a few times, and then she actually got sick and was in the hospital for a little while. But it was really neat to see how excited she was. And when we told her the Joseph Smith story, like I just told you, it really rung true to her. And she was like, when she was younger, she'd had a vision or a dream of Jesus Christ, and she was like, "That is exactly what he looked like in my dream." And it was so neat to just be like, the Lord made something so small happen so that we could find her, and she's really looking. So that was really neat. I think the greatest thing a missionary in the Czech Republic can do is be a happy missionary, because people there see it. We served in one city called Ostrava, where people tended to not be very happy. It was a really dirty city, and everybody was so work driven, and that's kind of all they did. And a lot of them were upset about their lives, and when we'd contact them, they'd say, "Oh, what do you think of Ostrava?" And I would say, "I love it. It's the city of miracles." And people would be like, "What? Really? Why would you say that?" And it helps them realize how much they do have, and that they determine how their life is. And the gospel can help them see how to do that. And so that is the biggest advice I would give to any missionary, is be a happy missionary and be excited about your life and their life. I know that this gospel is a gospel of joy, and that our Heavenly Father intends it for us to be happy, not only now but forever. And I know that Jesus Christ really came and really lived and died and suffered for us. And that's not only for the people that you teach as a missionary, but it's for the missionary who maybe doesn't feel like they have it all, or it's for the individual preparing for a mission that doesn't feel as confident and courageous as they think the stripling warriors were. And it's for the returned missionary who is looking for direction in their life. And it's for the parent with kids who isn't sure how to help them through their struggles. It's for everyone, both the righteous and the wicked, both the ones who know about the gospel and those who don't. And I think that's the beautiful thing about it, that we can all be made complete and happy through it. We can all be healed through the atonement of Jesus Christ. And as a missionary, you get to share that with people who feel broken and people who feel lost. And you can also partake of that. It's the most important thing we could tell anyone. And we need to seize the moment. I know that it's so true, and I know that I have been so blessed to know that and to see the effect of that news on others as I preach the gospel in the Czech Republic. I say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.